My name is Karen Felsted. I'm with the National Commission on Veterinary Economic Issues, and I'm going to talk today about trends in veterinary medicine and how these impact your practice and what you should do about them. If you're not familiar with the NCVEI, let me just take a minute to tell you about us. The National Commission on Veterinary Economic Issues was formed in 2000 by the AVMA, AHA, and the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges to address economic and business issues impacting the profession. Everybody agrees that the issues facing the profession are different now than those 10 years ago, but everybody also agrees that we have as many challenges that we're trying to sort out now as we did then, even if they're different. The NCVEI is funded primarily by members of the animal health industry, and because of their generous support, we are able to provide the tools and resources that we have free of charge to users of our website. The first trend that I want to talk about is the recession. Now, we all know that technically the recession ended 18 months ago, but for most of us, we're not seeing that end in our practices, and as far as we're concerned, the recession is still here. We have traditionally thought about veterinary medicine as being a recession-proof profession. You can see from this slide that in previous recessions, when the gross domestic product declined, a sign of a recession, veterinary medicine increased during those recessions. And we were very fortunate because veterinary medicine would sometimes increase pretty dramatically. No one really thinks that this recession has been as easy on veterinary medicine as previous ones have been. If you look at data from the NCVEI website, you can see that revenue growth from 2008 to 2009 was somewhere between a negative 2% and a positive 1%. In addition to looking at information from our website, we've looked at information from other sources as well, and in general, this seems to be the range that most people feel revenue growth has fallen within during this first year of the recession. Everybody agrees that transactions have been the big driver in the revenue decline, and most people think that the decline in transactions was somewhere between 2 and 3%. That decline in transactions was counterbalanced by an increase in average transaction charge, and so that resulted in either flat revenue, maybe a little bit of a growth, maybe a little bit of a decline, but the ATC was what really helped this situation from being worse. And of course, an increase in ATC can be from a couple of different things. I think in the early days of the recession, people raised fees to counterbalance some of the decline in transactions. But what also was happening was that people were seeing clients spend more when they finally did show up because their pets were sicker. So a couple of things probably impacted that increase in average transaction charge. A couple of things are interesting about these numbers. There's a lot of variation in how practices have responded or have been impacted by the recession. You could break that down probably into thirds and say a third of the practices have been very dramatically impacted, so saw big revenue declines. A third of the practices were flat, and another third of the practices actually saw increased revenue. And I think this is different from previous recessions in that there's been so much variety in how practices have been impacted. To put this revenue growth, if you want to call it growth, into perspective, back in the good old days, annual revenue growth in a practice might have been somewhere between 8 and 13%. So to see essentially flat growth is a real change and obviously a very unwelcome surprise. The impact of the recession is certainly continuing into 2010. This slide shows information on the number of patient visits in 2000 and the first 9 months of 2010 compared to the same period in 2009. Only about 13 practices saw an increase in patient visits of greater than 5% this year. Another 16% saw an increase of 1 to 5%, and another 15% said that patient visits were essentially flat in 2010 compared to 2009. What's a little disheartening is the number of practices that are still seeing a decline in patient visits. About 31% of the respondents said that patient visits declined 1 to 5%, and another 25% said that they declined greater than 5%. So no question, we are still seeing the impact of the recession. And of course, the recession hasn't just impacted practicing veterinarians. It's also impacted students. In February of 2009, the NCVEI ran a quick poll that asked, Are you planning on hiring a new doctor this year? And about 65% of the practices said no. Another 24% said yes, and about 11% were undecided. What would have been really interesting is if we had asked this question in, say, 2007 or the early part of 2008, because the number of practices saying yes would have been dramatically higher. I mean, those were the times when practices who were looking for associates couldn't find them, and it's a different world now. We asked this question again in March of 2010 and didn't get results that were a whole lot different. A few more people were undecided, and some of those undecideds came both out of the no category as well as the yes category. But there's not been a clear increase in hiring. I've been told that most new graduates are finding jobs, but what is different is the number of offers that they're getting and the flexibility they have in picking where they want to live, how much money they want to make, what practice they want to work at. So the jobs are there, you just don't have as much choice as you used to. Clients, of course, have also been impacted by the recession. We asked practices in January of this year, which answer best describes the current behavior of your clients? And 21% said they're postponing wellness care. Another 2% said that clients aren't providing wellness care at all. Fortunately, that's a pretty small percentage. Almost 45% said that clients were postponing care for sick pets, and that's a disturbing number. Another 22% said that while clients were treating their sick pets, they were using or choosing less expensive treatment options. A few practices said that more clients were euthanizing their pets than had previously, and about 8% said that they hadn't seen any change in client behavior at all. That 8% is obviously the practices who haven't been impacted by the recession, but that's a very small number. Another indication of client concerns could be seen in this question. We ask, has your practice seen a change in the payment options used by clients in the last 6 months? And only 26% of practices said no. A few practices said clients were using more pet insurance. About 12% of practices said that clients were using more medical payment plans such as care credit. About 27% of practices said that clients were wanting to use more accounts receivable or held checks, and about a third of the practices said clients have wanted or have selected one or more of the above options compared to previously. So what these results are telling us is that clients are concerned about money. They're making more careful decisions about where they spend their money, and some of that decision making has to do with financing alternatives, with how and where they're going to find the money to pay for the care. So what's the answer? Obviously, the best answer would be if the recession just went away. Unfortunately, even though technically it's over, none of us really think that we're going to be recovering from the recession very quickly. Most experts, and in fact most of us who are not experts but are living here in the trenches, agree with that assessment. Customers and clients are starting to spend a little bit more money than they used to, but that the free spending ways from a couple of years ago are not back, and nobody really expects that money to be flowing quite so fast as it did for a few years to come. So if we can't have an end to the recession, then what is it that we're going to focus on in order to keep our practices afloat? The answer is better business practices. The answer is always better business practices if you want to have a financially successful business, but it's more important in recessionary times than it is when times are good, because when times are good, you can make some business mistakes and it isn't going to matter. But when times are bad, those mistakes will come back to haunt you. The AVMA-Pfizer Business Practices Study was released in 2004, and even then we saw the impact of better business practices. 62% of practice owners did not use financial concepts to manage their businesses. And a financial concept can be any of a variety of activities. It may mean the use of a budget. It may mean tracking the production of your veterinarians. It may mean analyzing equipment purchases to see how much additional revenue you'll bring in before you actually buy the equipment. So any of a whole host of economic and business activities fall into that financial concepts category. But what was very clear is that the 38% of practice owners who do use financial concepts make more money. And that's going to be true in a recessionary period or a post-recessionary period, as well as back in 2004 when we were less concerned about these kinds of things. So in order for us to survive this recession and be prepared for the next one, because they will come again, we need to be focusing on better business practices. And that's something that I'll talk about in one of the later segments. Before I end this session on the recession, though, I want to talk briefly about an experience I had at Hershey World. I spoke at a conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Hershey World is right in the center of town there. And you can go down to Hershey World and you can ride a little train through a mini factory, and you can make your own candy bars, and you can buy and eat every possible chocolate product. And you can also buy every possible non-food item emblazoned with the Hershey logos. And there is everything for sale. Christmas ornaments, computer flash drives, jewelry, clothing, giant chocolate bars, you name it, they've got it. What I thought was astounding about this was the amount of money that was being spent there. I, who had not planned on spending any money at all, spent $35 on completely unnecessary Hershey emblazoned stuff. The people in front of me spent $450 on stuff. So it is clear that there is no recession at Hershey World. And it's those kinds of businesses that we have to look at and say, okay, what are they doing that is making them recession-proof, or at least more recession-proof than we are? And some of it probably has to do with the customer experience. Some of it has to do with communicating value. Some of it has to do with making it easy for clients to come to our places of business to spend money. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn in the future from businesses outside of veterinary medicine.